Hey friends, welcome back to the channel and to another episode of Research Paper Summary. Today I'll be covering an EMNLP 2020 paper, a rigorous study on name entity recognition. Can fine-tuning pre-trained model leads to promised land? This paper aims to find out whether pre-trained supervised neural NER models can generalize well in an open setting environment by conducting 4 randomization tests on standard NER benchmarks. In this video, I'll first go over the context and contribution of this paper. I'll then dive straight into the proposed 4 randomization tests. And lastly, I'll finish up this video by sharing some of the experimental results and analysis of these tests. I hope you find this useful. Let's get to it. If you're new here, my name is Ryan. I'm a PhD student based in London, and on this channel I mainly share my personal development journey as a student entrepreneur, covering my PhD research in AI, my entrepreneurship journey, as well as different life design topics. If you're a student, entrepreneur, first generation student, or all of the above, consider subscribing. There is a significant performance difference between regular NER benchmarks and NER in open settings. In an open setting environment, mentions tend not to follow a regular structures, mention coverage tend to be very low, and fully annotated dataset tends to be very rare. The main research question of this paper is to find out whether pre-trained supervised NER models can generalize well in an open setting environment. This involves conducting 4 randomization tests on the standard NER benchmarks. Specifically, they remove name regularity, mention coverage, and context diversity from NER benchmarks in order to assess their impact on the generalization ability of models. Let's now take a look at the randomization test. There are 4 randomization tests introduced in this paper. The first randomization test is the name permutation, which replaces the same entity mention with an identical random n-gram string. For example, we replace the original Putin and Blair's mention with the United and Hillsborough string respectively. The second test is the mention permutation, which replaces each mention with a unique n-gram string. This means that 2 mentions with the same utterance will be replaced by different strings. For example, here we replace the same Putin mentions with 2 different strings, the United and which go. The third randomization test is context reduction, and the fourth one is mention reduction. Context reduction aims to reduce diversity of sentences, yet still preserve all mentions. Whereas mention reductions keeps all the sentences but only preserves a small part of the original mentions. So, for example, for context reduction, we would use the same sentences across different mentions, and this is what you can see here for Putin, Blair, and Bush entity mentions. For mention reduction, you can see that we are doing the opposite and we keep the sentence different but replace all entities with selected few entities. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, we are focusing on name regularity, mention coverage, and context diversity. From these experiments, here are the conclusions. Firstly, we have name regularity. Here we conclude that name regularity is critical for the models to generalize to unseen mentions. Here are the results that showcase this. As you can see here, the table showcases the overall results of name permutation and mention permutation. When we remove name regularity, the overall performance drops significantly by 24% overall, with majority of entity types experience a drop in performance of more than 40%, showcasing the importance of name regularity on model generalization ability. We can also see on table 3 that the removal of name regularity has led to performance decrease on mentions not seen in the training set, and this is outlined in the out dictionary column. This is also further illustrated by the increase in performance difference between in-dictionary and out-dictionary entities. What this means is that in-dictionary's performance wasn't as affected by the removal of name regularity as out-of-dictionary entities. Overall, name regularity is important for model generalization of unseen mentions. Without name regularity, our model is merely memorizing and disambiguating names that are seen in the training set. Next up, we have mention coverage. Here we found that high mention coverage, meaning that a large proportion of the test entities have been seen in the training set, may undermine the model's ability to generalize. This is a very important observation because in order for us to apply NER models to a practical setting, we needed to be able to perform in a low mention coverage environment. In order for models to perform well in a low mention coverage environment, the model will have to rely heavily on context knowledge for NER predictions. Here are some of the results that we have found through our experiments. As you can see here on table 4, it compares the performance of name permutation out of dictionary column with mention permutation. Here you can see that the model performs better in the mention permutation setting for all entity types, showcasing that high mention coverage undermines the model's ability to generalize unseen mentions. High mention coverage will lead the models to mainly memorizing and disambiguate frequent entity names rather than picking up irregular entities. And lastly, we have context diversity. Here we conclude that context patterns may not require a large amount of data to capture if we are using a pre-trained encoders. Again, this is a very important observation because it is often highly costly and impractical to have access to fully annotated dataset in an open setting environment. Here we're experimenting with both context reduction and mention reduction. For these experiments, we vary the preserved information in each setting from 5% all the way up to 100%. Here are the results. As you can see here, in sentence reduction, the performance increases as training data increases. This is to be expected. Increased training data will introduce more name regularity knowledge and therefore improve the performance. In context reduction, however, there is no significant performance improvement beyond the 30% vanilla data. Through this observation, we can see that once it reaches a certain amount, the training data is enough to capture sufficient context patterns, and any further increase would just add more name regularity knowledge. These overall results also tell us that name regularity and context patterns for NER can be learned separately. And that's it for today's video. Over the last few months, my friends and I have been developing a platform called Xeratin, where we convert non-fiction books into actionable steps so that you can spend less time reading and more time taking actions. On the platform, we have over 150 plus actionable steps from many best-selling books. It will mean a lot to us if you can go check it out and let us know what you think. I will link up in the description below. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys around next time.